Welcome to the lecture on what is PHP. In this lecture, we'll understand PHP and what are its benefits and features. Then we'll understand how PHP will work in a web application. Okay, so let's jump into the topic. So here are the lecture objectives. After completing this lecture, you should be able to explain what is PHP. So we'll understand what you can do with PHP with the concepts that we have previously seen, like client server model and request and response. This way you'll be able to appreciate what problem that PHP is solving in the web application. Okay, so let's move on to the topic. Before we look at what is PHP, let's take a moment to understand how the logo looks like. So on the left hand side is the official logo of PHP. This is how it looks like. On the right hand side there will be an unofficial logo which looks like an elephant. So there will be a times where you'll see the elephant logo showing up with PHP. This is not an official one, but quite famous around the PHP community. If you want to access the PHP manual, that's basically all the documentation of PHP, go to www.php.net. This is where you can find all the libraries and all the manual of PHP. If you want to find what are the latest updates on PHP, you can go to this site. Okay, remember the logo, don't get confused when you see the elephant logo in the PHP. Okay, so let's look at what is PHP. PHP is an acronym for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. Okay, this is basically a preprocessor for the text that is being exchanged over the internet. That's why it's called as hypertext. PHP is a server-side scripting, which means PHP runs on server side. So we know what is client side and server side. So PHP language runs on server side. That's why it's called as server-side scripting language. PHP is an interpreted language. You have a compiler, you have an interpreter. Before you run the program, you have to compile the program. That's basically the compiler language. Interpreter is interpreted whenever you access it. It's not compiled in the background and ready to use, but it is interpreted every time. That's basically called from the source side. Okay, so when you run a PHP program, the program is interpreted into the whatever output that PHP is to give at the runtime itself. Next is PHP is basically used to create dynamic content. Dynamic content means a content on the fly, and on the fly in the sense whenever it's required, that's data has been fetched from somewhere. That's basically could be a database or could be a file and then sent back to the client side. So that's basically the power of PHP comes in, which it can do at the server side. Instead of just showing a static data like an image, it could also pull a data from a database and generate the data on the fly and give it to the client side. PHP code is embedded in the HTML page which runs on the server. PHP is very easy to use. You just have to embed into HTML page. You don't have to really write a big method to generate an PHP. It's very simple. If you know HTML, it's just a piece of line of code that you embed in the HTML and it's ready to run. So that's basically a summary of what is PHP. So you can combine all of this topic when you want to explain to someone. Let's say someone asks you what is PHP. You can say PHP is a server-side interpreted language which is used to create dynamic content and which can be embedded in the HTML page. So it basically covers all these topics. It has different purpose, but it actually covers everything in the definition that you are saying. So include this in your definitions. Tell them it is a server-side. And also it is an interpreted language. So when someone asks you what is an interpreted language and what is a compiler, interpreted language is the one that executes whenever the request has been done. The compiler is basically you have to pre-compile before it actually runs. Dynamic content, and also it is easy to embed in the HTML page. Okay, so next let's understand what we can do with PHP. Okay, a PHP can read data from a form submitted from the HTML page. So you have been submitting all these forms on the web, like a student application, employee application, could be your creation of login details and all those things. That is a form on your client side. When you submit that form and click on submit button from the client side, the request will go to the server side. At the server side, there will be a PHP script which can read all the data from the form that is been submitted from the HTML page. Okay, you can read, save, update and delete data from the database using the PHP code. You can even send emails from PHP. If there are cookies that is been set onto the client side, you can even set a cookie, you can accept a cookie, you can read a cookie, you can delete a cookie. You can also do the tracking of the user via the session management. This is similar to when you're trying to buy something on the Amazon, right? You try to click a product and say add to cart, then you go for shopping and come back to your cart, your item is there. That's basically session management. So it will help you remember what you're trying to do on the web page, and then it will track down all these details with something called as session management. It also help you to restrict user to access some pages on your website. Let's say your website have an admin dashboard or a normal user dashboard. You can restrict the admin dashboard with some of the roles, and also restrict some of the parts of the admin dashboard with different roles altogether. Okay, that's all possible with the PHP. Well, there are many other backend transactions that you can do at the server side. As when we go into the lecture, we'll try to understand it, but this is very core about what PHP can do in the web application. It can read the data that has been sent from the client side, access the database, play around with cookies, creating, deleting, track the sessions, and you can do some kind of security on the web page as well. Okay, so remember this, what you can do with PHP. This is a very common question being asked. The first question they will ask you, what is PHP? The second is what you can do with PHP. So try to remember all those points that I've given and try to incorporate them in your definitions. So what we have learned by now, you should be able to explain what is PHP and also describe what you can do with PHP. So that's all for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one.